Hello, it's Tyler Esselman here.
And it's Michael Osinski over here.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11. It's a podcast that you are listening to right now, where we talk to somebody who we've invited to have a conversation with us about an album that they believe is perfect.
So perfect, in fact, Michael, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
It just ain't good enough.
Right.
Never gonna be.
And we talk about perfection, right? The idea of perfection. I'm a recovering perfectionist, self-professed. You consider yourself one of those too?
Oh, most definitely. I believe I wrote my my personal statement for my college applications about wrestling with my perfection. I think it was titled Between God and Park Place. And I'm not going to explain what that means because I don't feel like it.
That's a subject for a longer episode, I guess.
I think, yeah, for a therapy session, I think.
Hell yeah. You know, and sometimes these episodes can be quite therapeutic, but that's certainly not what we're doing. All we're trying to do is we're trying to hear about what somebody thinks is a perfect album. And I think the one that our guest brought today will inspire a lot of conversation, I hope. And who are we speaking to? It's a really great guest today.
We're talking to Stewart Romeo, who I know from Cherubs, the summer theater program that I have taught at in the past. Stewart Romeo is an artist and technical director at Roosevelt University with a huge love of music since before he could walk or talk. Born and raised in Chicago, he has worked in the city as a performer in theater, but now has his eye on creating and performing music of his own.
Boom. He's putting on a different hat.
He sure is.
I bet Stewart looks good in a hat. Maybe we'll get him a hat. Maybe that'll be the first piece of merch that we get is This One Goes to 11 hats.
Listeners, you should note we did have a conversation with Stewart before in a previous season, but the episode did not air for various reasons. So we make a reference to that within the episode, just so you know when we keep saying like, oh, we're talking to you again. That's why. Also, I think it's just crucial to acknowledge that the album we're talking about, we had to have some slightly difficult conversations regarding this album simply because of things that are said within the album, and I think we do an okay job of handling that. But we're imperfect beings, so hopefully the imperfection of our conversation inspires you to have better conversations, and get you to think about this album from more than just a musical perspective, but also sort of a real world, big picture perspective.
Yeah, I think it's one of the challenges of this thing we're doing, this podcast we're doing, is like how do we enter those conversations and to what end, right? Like we're just interested in having it, and I think Stewart was really, really generous with his perspective and his kindness, and really couldn't have talked to anybody better about a real challenging album like this one.
Yeah, well said, Tyler.
And the same to you. You said it well too.
Oh,
but without further ado, should we get into it? Should we let him hear Stewart?
I think we should. Let's get right to it. Let's jump right in. Stewart, welcome back. Welcome back to This One Goes to 11. How's it going?
Man, it is good to be back, and it is nice to be back. That's all I'll say.
Dear listeners, just so you know, we've actually already recorded an episode with Stewart. We'll decide later or not whether we want you to want to talk about it, but this is our second time talking with Stewart. And you know what? Frankly, I'm not mad to get to talk to Stewart twice. That's okay by me.
I'm not mad about it.
Me neither. I was about to say, this is a nice little fun.
Well, then, Stewart, what album hath thou brought before the tribunal this time?
Man, I have brought before the tribunal, humbly, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by Kendrick Lamar.
Haven't heard of him. Yeah. Not sure who this guy is.
Man, he's just up and comer,
Yeah.
New guy.
Yeah. Clubs I've seen, he's hot. He's hot now. He's new. He's great though.
he still acts like it. He's still got the like he's still coming up, which is I think a good thing. It's to his credit that he still bears that energy.
Yeah. But I also think like one of the things that I'm going to talk about once we get more into it is like this isn't necessarily like it is Kendrick Lamar. Like obviously it is Kendrick Lamar the person, but I think it's a different he's coming at it in a different way.
Yeah.
And some of that is sadly like from a place of I think ignorance, and then some of it is from a place of like growing and like going to therapy, because like the last album that I talked about, the reason why I said it was perfect was because I genuinely thought like that was like the culmination of a person's work. But like this one, I feel like it's a perfect album because it's the perfect album to show that there is creativity, but beyond the pain of art and working through some of that pain, and some of it, yeah, you do have to like kind of bear for the world to see. Because one of my hardest things on Kendrick Lamar is that I feel like he's the old man who points the finger at the community, like, you guys are doing this and you guys are doing that. And I feel like this one was more so like, I've been fucking up. And I kind of like
this
that.
one's on me.
Yeah, you know, and I think that's like,
sure.
I like that instead of it more so being like you're blaming the people who can't, these are the people who are coming to see your concerts. These are the people who you've, in some ways, changed parts of yourself a little bit for. Because like he doesn't drink or smoke, but he's made a lot of songs about it. And that's something that I think I'm glad he made this project, because it's a little bit more introspective.
Ooh, a perfect little transition to a little thing that we like to do. You probably remember what we like to do for our listeners who may not be familiar with Kendrick, which is crazy, or this album. I was given the task today of presenting everyone's favorite segment, which is, Michael,
which is the beginner's guide to Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers in 60 seconds.
Yes, sir.
And that's me today. So I'm gonna. This one was difficult, but as I said in our last episode, I'm taking the pressure off myself. That some of these are gonna suck is what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that to lower your expectations. I'm saying that because like that's the conceit here. The conceit here is that it is a Herculean task to summarize a person's body of work in 60 seconds, and it's a good thing to give ourselves that challenge.
And Tyler, much like Kendrick does on this album, I encourage you to embrace the imperfection.
Yes, I will. Excellent. Do you have my timer, Michael?
Oh, I've got your timer. And are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. In 3, 2, 1. Go.
Paging Mr. Duckworth. Chances are, if you have a pulse and reside somewhere in the English-speaking parts of the world, you are at least somewhat familiar with the work of one Mr. Kendrick Lamar. A proud son of Compton, California, Kendrick's music bears heavy influence from his upbringing amidst the upheaval and violence of Los Angeles in the 90s, and the music that grew out of it from artists like Tupac Shakur, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and NWA. He began making his own music under the moniker K-Dot soon secured a contract with the fledgling record label Top Dog Entertainment. Proving himself to be an innovative voice in the SoCal hip-hop scene and a deeply effective collaborator, his full-length debut, Section 80, was released in 2011 to wide acclaim. So much so that Dre, Snoop, and The Game dubbed him the new king of the West Coast. Noted for his inventive and confessional lyric style and his ability to infuse his work with diverse musical influences, his particular strain of conscious hip-hop tackles the most pressing political issues of our day while being undeniably and infectiously listenable. His fifth studio album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, sees him scale back to a minimalist production style while continuing to mind his fears. Did he go? Damn it.
He was close, though. He was close.
I was close. I only had like half a line left, so that was pretty good.
That's all good.
Okay, Stewart. So, yes. You heard how I did.
I did.
How would you grade my job? How would you score my effort at giving our listeners a recap of Kendrick and this album in 60 seconds? How did I do?
I'm gonna be real. I say like B plus, A minus, because you really got a lot of the decent stuff in there. Like you got some decent stuff. You got because that was a big moment. Like Dre, Snoop, and The Game. Naming him the king of West Coast hip hop. Like that was a big moment. Like I remember when I saw that moment, and a lot of the history you really got. Like I was solid. And
job done. B plus, A minus. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. The only reason why I say B plus is because you didn't get to finish it. You didn't get to
Thank you.
That would have got you.
That's the honesty we hope for from our guests. Respect. So, as much as this is a podcast episode about Kendrick, it's also a podcast about you, a friend of ours, and somebody that somebody who we respect and want to know more about. So, tell us. What would you say is your relationship with music, sort of in general? Like, what role does it play in your life on a day-to-day basis?
It started ever since I was a kid, I would say, because I had members in my family who played multiple instruments, and I always like heard music as a kid, and I always had like a deep fascination and love for it. And then like I think because of how I grew up and the people I grew up around, I got like a lot of different genres of music in my life. Like with my dad, I got like a lot of Caribbean and like soca and different types of vibes from that, but also like religious music because he's like super religious. From my mom, I got like a lot of, I would say like soul, but also like a lot of rock and some like a lot of R&B and stuff like that. Then my brother obviously was mostly hip hop, and then my sister was like a lot of different, I think, otherworldly and or like I think the rock and the non necessarily black focused music of her generation. Cause I think my mom, like she introduced me to like the Beatles and a bunch of different stuff like that. And then my sister introduced me to like K-pop and a lot of different things. And I've always really liked music. I started making music. So I would make music before COVID, but I started producing my own stuff after when I was locked in the crib. Before I met Michael, and a part of what I was even doing when I was at Cherubs was working on some of my own music. And I have a deep love for it. I don't think that there's anything else that I would want to do besides like, you know what I'm saying, performing and doing theater. But like, it's a big part of my life. There was a time period, especially like even in high school, where I would wear headphones like 100% of the time. And like my friends had just grown so accustomed to it, I would just read their lips. Like I wouldn't even turn the music down because I love listening to music all the time. And so that's always been like a big thing for me. And it's still going to be a big thing for me. Like I love music. It is something that I really don't think I could live without.
That's great. What kind of otherworldly music were you talking about from your sister? You said she gave you K-pop. What is otherworldly music to you?
So, and I think when I say otherworldly, I mean like stuff that I either wouldn't have thought of or I wouldn't have thought I would like personally. Like she got me back into country, I think, especially with what's her name? Casey Musgraves.
I didn't love Casey.
Fire.
Yeah.
But like initially
great.
I would be like, oh, that music's probably not for me. But you know, on a road trip or two and I hear some songs, I'm like, what's that? You know,
she has a way of doing that. She like that's exactly how my response was to Casey. My former roommate, she was like, "You got to listen to this," and I was very skeptical, but she had me right away, hook, line, and sinker.
Great music, and like K-pop definitely was like an adjustment because like I like pop music, but I had always had like I think a bad experience with J-pop because it was like a lot. It was a little overwhelming. But I thought K-pop was raw. Like I thought K-pop was fire. There's like a generation, like especially shout out SNSD because that's her favorite group. Favorite member Sunny. I ain't forget. Shout out my sister. But
3,000 points for being a good brother.
I appreciate it. But that's like that type of music. Even though it is still modeled after American music, it has its own flavor. And then like even some of my other friends that I had known, but also my sister, like electronic music and like techno, like I kind of got into. And like one of the other suggestions before Mr. Morale got picked was Justice by Justice, because I really am like a big fan. And shout out to my homie, well, we ain't spoken in a long time, but shout out my homie Ethan who put me onto that album, because that's like one of my favorite electronic albums that I've ever heard, and it kind of got me into and still influences the music that I even make today, because I like those sounds, even though they're not to the normal ear like super pleasant all the time, because I like Glitch Mob and stuff, and I tried to play it for my mom and she was like, I'm getting a headache, and I was like, okay. It's not challenging.
Do you think, I mean, the sort of music you're making now, do you feel like you're consciously trying to draw from those influences, or do you think that just your history with music just finds its way into what you make?
I think it's more of the latter, because like I don't know if I've ever made like a conscious choice. It's more so like most of the time when I make music, I make what I would want to hear and what I like to hear when I'm working on it. And sometimes, you know, I'll play it for other people and they'll be like, bro, I thought you made hip hop, bro. Like, what is this? And then I'll play other songs and they're like, okay. So yeah, you do hip hop and R&B. But I'm like, yeah, but other songs that I do, might sound like house music because I grew up in Chicago, and that's like, like the People's Choice Festival happens like literally, I'd say like a couple blocks down from my house. So you could literally hear the music when it's going on, through your window, and you hear it on a daily basis. I mean, you hear it every year, so you get used to it. You start to like to hear it. Ooh, oh, ee, and it's like those different sounds and those different vibes that you start to like. And so it bleeds into what you create, because then you're working on like a melody or a rhythm line, and you're like, oh, this does kind of sound like a house rhythm, but I like that because I listen to house music growing up.
So, Stuart, we're curious. How did you discover this Kendrick Lamar fellow, and particularly this album we're talking about today?
So let me think. I gotta think back, but I would say, so my first interaction with Kendrick Lamar, if I'm telling the truth, like friends of mine in high school had like, and even like my own brother had listened to Section 80, but at the time I was like, man, I don't really know if I'm trying to hear all that. I heard the hits, but I wasn't super duper interested in listening to a lot of stuff that he was doing. But Good Kid, Mad City, I'm gonna be real, was really like a big turning point.
Yeah,
a lot of good songs, and when I listened to the whole tape, I was like, oh no, this is an album. Like, this is not just somebody putting. Because I talk about that a lot. That there's a difference between, I think, an album and people just kind of putting tracks together to make a project. But I thought that was like a real album, beautiful story, crazy story, but really one that's worth taking the time to listen to more than once to deconstruct. And that's kind of how I got into Kendrick. In specific, I heard this song before I listened to Good Kid, Mad City that was called Dumpin', that was actually produced by J. Cole, which was a great song, but I got into Kendrick Lamar more. And then I started seeing him on like BET Cyphers and all these different things. And I started being like, oh, like, this dude's really got it. Like, I gotta figure out what's going on. And that's kind of how I got introduced to him. And then, since then I have been a decent fan.
Do you keep tabs on him? Like, is you feel like he's on, I guess it's a question about your relationship with your favorite artists. Like, are you the kind of person that sort of is checking in on them and like seeing, like using the channels to see what they're up to, or do you just kind of let it come to you as it will?
I watch interviews. I don't necessarily like, because that's the thing about like artists, even if I like them a lot, I don't necessarily like keep like super duper duper tabs on them, because that's how the last situation ended up catching me by surprise. But I do say, like, I like to listen to a lot of the interviews that they do, and a lot of the times I like to, like, once I see something that interests me, or once there's a project and I start seeing like leaks or different things, then that's when I start to dig into that person and try to figure out more about him. And it's a very crazy and interesting story, including his relationship with Baby Keem. Man, great. But that's
his cousin, right? Baby Keem's his cousin.
Yes. Crazy story.
And Nick Young, I believe, is his cousin, right?
He's also his family member. Yeah.
Bless Nick Young.
Man.
Like that's a basketball player that, like, of an era. He could have only existed in the aughts, in the NBA of the aughts.
Very true. Very true.
Nick Young was perfect for the NBA of the aughts.
Yes, sir.
But what about this album?
Yeah, what were your first impressions of this one?
Man, initially, this was probably, because the thing that I think, especially in the Black community, that we're always aware of when it comes to Kendrick at a certain point was that, like, he was a Black Israelite, and he was definitely somebody who didn't like believe in COVID or those different things. Like, he was somebody who denied a lot of like Western medicine and believed more in like natural remedies. And while I do believe in natural remedies, take your ass to the doctor. But
9,000 points for take your ass to the doctor.
Right. But I do think like one of the things that really like tipped me over was, I think it was Savior. Yeah, he had said, then I caught COVID and started to question Kyrie, will I stay organic or hurt in his bed for 2 weeks? And like those lines and a lot of other bars that I heard in this project, I was like, what's going on with you? And like, that's when I started thinking more about the first song, United in Grief, where he was like, he had gotten a therapist, and I was like, oh wait, hold on. This might be a different album. Because at first, when I heard the leak of United in Grief, I was like a little nervous because I was like, okay, hold on, he might be turning up the crazy a little bit, you know, and it might be the same as some other artists that I've been very big fans of, but like has gone down the deep end. But I think for him, it was very interesting to see. I do still think he was doing he did a little trauma porn, I ain't gonna lie, which kind of hurts to see, but I get why he did it, but it was still a little, I felt like it was a little trauma pornish. But
Yeah.
I think besides that, like, there were certain things that he was just saying where I was like, okay, nah, something's different. You're not, this, I want to listen to this. Because the other ones I listened to, but I don't know if I came back to my favorites, but I think this is one of his first projects in a long time where I listened to the whole thing more than once and wanted to hear it more than once, except for like one or two songs.
Well, there, he across all the writing about him and across all, I think the way that I know him to be, like kind of his personality relative to, you know, the other big rappers that are kind of on his level, he always gets this introspective tag. People always say he's one of the most introspective rappers in the game, and he's a person who's really kind of like trying to mine the depths of his own fears. And as I was going to get to in the 60-second intro, if I would have done a better job, you know, he's really trying to do something that confronts hard truths. Do you feel like this album does that more than his previous albums did it, or
100%?
You do? Okay.
I think this is probably his most introspective project, and also his most, and I think not in a bad way, self-centered projects. Because I think in other projects, he either addresses certain other things like on Element and like with DNA and all these other songs that kind of address other things that he was dealing with. And even like To Pimp a Butterfly, where it's like All Right and all these different songs where he's kind of like, he's talking about himself and he's talking about the community, but he's also talking about certain beefs and other things that he's gotten going on. And he talks about it on this project, but I feel like this is as close to a story about Kendrick Lamar like Good Kid, Mad City was. Like, I feel like Element is the story of Kendrick Lamar, but it's told from like a lens. But I feel like Mr. Morale and the Big Stepper is like, even with the cover, it shows like flaws and all. And I feel like with the other ones, there is an acknowledgement of flaws, but I feel like there is like I don't know. I feel like there's a difference between this project and the other ones that he's put out a little bit, even though there has been an introspective nature to the other one. It's what happens when you go to therapy. There's a different lens that you finally see things through once you kind of get certain things that may have been messing with you your whole life, you know, like different traumas and other things that make you look at things from a certain perspective. But once you move away from that, or once you start working through it, you still kind of like see that old perspective, but you can also see the new one. You're like, oh, fuck. Okay. So this is what I wasn't seeing because of either my pain or whatever I was going through. And that can kind of, I think, make a very interesting project, which is why this is technically my favorite.
Yeah. There's also a thing that happens, I think, with a lot of musicians that reach the level of fame that he's reached, where at some point, by necessity and by the nature of what their lives are like on a day-to-day basis, they have to sort of write about the nature of fame, and they have to write it. They have to write about how that weighs on them, or how they try to carry it. The Crown of Thorns thing, that is part and parcel to this album, I think is a symbolic element of that. Yeah. But I also think that he does something interesting in this, where he's talking about the difficulties of being famous and being, you know, like the weight he has to bear because of that. But it doesn't feel like he's questioning. I mean, maybe he's questioning why he has this recognition and this attention on him, but it feels like he's successful in going beyond that and going deeper to a scary place, and some scary places and some beautiful places, that you don't. When some artists write about fame, I don't think they always achieve that kind of depth to it.
Yeah, I think this one, the reason why I say it's not like necessarily a Kendrick Lamar project was because like around the time when he was about to drop it, that's when I normally start to tap in on any artist that's like my favorite. Like he started signing these different things, Oklahoma, and this is kind of like this different name that he's come up with. That's his connection to feeling like these words aren't necessarily coming from him anymore, or from like the earthly version of him. And it's more like an elevated person who has worked through a lot of things, but also is connected to a higher power. Because like one of the biggest things about this project that I thought was dope that he acknowledged was that he's had writer's block for like 2 years. Yeah. He said 1,365 days. I've been going through something. And that was partly because of all those things that he talks about in the project, which made it so that he could not write or he didn't like what he was creating, which is why you have so many like offshoots and all these other tracks that kind of leaked, as well as different versions of songs that are on other people's project. Because like one verse that I kind of wish had stayed but is gone is he had a verse on Vent, the song that's on Baby Keem's album, The Melodic Blue. Mm-hmm. He had a verse on there that got cut off. There's a song that he had with Andre 3000 and Pharrell that did not make the cut. There's 3 different versions of at least 2 of the songs on the project, including Rich Spirit. There's like this, like this is probably, I think, for us as viewers and not people who necessarily knew Kendrick Lamar as much, this was the most that I ever was aware of his process or aware of how he was having difficulty working on it. And like being able to see that and see what was the end all be all result was very interesting. Like, yeah, that shit was different.
I think the thing that struck me most about this album is the fact that it feels messy. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that he's just making the mess and letting us experience the mess. Like you said, yeah, he started going through therapy. This also sounds like someone who is probably still going through therapy because things aren't resolved. Things aren't tied up neatly. Yeah, I think it's still produced within an inch of its life. The album is still like super produced, well produced, very well produced, but yet it still manages to capture that sort of mess that's going on, both in terms of content and form. You know, the first track you mentioned, United in Grief, it even like within a minute to a minute and a half of the song, he's already changed. There's already a beat change, like, and we're still on the same song. And there's like motifs that just pop up throughout the album and in random places you don't expect them to pop up. It does sort of feel like we're getting an artistic version of the closest we could come to being inside his head, whether he's replaying old memories or whether he's rehashing things as he is in therapy or as he's just like dreaming or whatnot. It just feels like an organized, well-produced mess.
And I think that's part of like the beauty of it, because if that person's a mess and you start to like look at that, I think, because one of the things that I saw when people talked about this album is that the reason why this album didn't do as well as his other albums is because this album kind of makes you like, at least, and I'll say I agree from my perspective, that it kind of makes you look at not just Kendrick Lamar, but it makes you look at yourself. Because like the reason why Father Time is one of my favorite songs is because I kind of relate to it. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, I do think, yeah, after my grandma died, my dad went to work the next day. He didn't take any relief. And it's something that when you hear it, you start to think about like your own things that you've gone through. And like when I listen to other songs and like, you know, like Crown and like a decent other songs that just like really make you start to, even if you don't make music, look at how you've approached life and where you are in your life and what you've been like dealing with or going through. And I think it makes you look at yourself and say like, well, what are you doing? And that's, I'll put it away that somebody put it best that like sums it up. Somebody said, man, I'm not trying to think about my life or what I've done. I'm trying to turn up. And that's what they said about Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. But that's what it kind of does. It makes you think about yourself and about your life and about how you've been doing things. And if that's the right way, because it's not necessarily the right way, you know?
Right.
Kendrick Lamar.
Well, it's the funny thing about guilt too.
Yeah.
It's the funny thing about guilt too, is that, you know, you have this, you can't change your actions. You know, it's like the only way to get past guilt is by forgiving yourself, really. I mean, not like this is anything that we all don't know, but I think actually being able to do that, actually being able to say, like, not even just say that I've forgiven myself, but being able to move through the world with a forgiveness for yourself that you can put towards others. I can see him wrestling with that. And I can see him saying, like, I don't know if I'll ever find an answer for how you're supposed to reconcile the things that you know, the things that you feel guilt for, the things that you feel shameful about. And that's, it's something I think I've really I really relate to that, especially over the last few years, that kind of seclusion that we've been going through with COVID and this this interruption to the progression of our lives has it makes you reflect on these things where you're like, well, damn, I don't have that much time to figure these things out, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay if I never really figure out how to bear that. Stewart, you mentioned it. You mentioned it already. We asked you to pick your standout track from the album.
Yes,
which one did you choose?
I did pick Father Time.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we're gonna give the listeners a chance to listen to that now, and we're gonna listen to it together, and then we'll be back to talk about it in just a few.
Let's get it.
Enjoy, everybody. Father Time. That's the end of part 1. If you access this episode via our YouTube playlist, you're about to hear our guest's standout track. If you'd like to jump ahead to part 2, you'll find a link in the description of this episode.